All right, good evening, everybody. We will call the meeting to order at 6:59, a few seconds early. And let me quickly run over the, the board norms, which are to maintain our focus, communicate respectfully, be present, keep the board productive and effective, and respect the agenda. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
Oh, yeah, in the policy section, there's a typo, and we have two that are labeled B4. So the second B4 is actually B2. Volunteers and work study students is B4, is B2.
Okay, great, thanks, Mike. Anything else? No. Seeing none, we will move on to our student report.
Hello.
Hello.
So, WRED, our basketball teams have started practices and games, and I believe that they are doing well. I'm 100% sure on that. And coming up this week, we have auditions for the next show for the WRED players. And this is a one-act show, and we take it to a drama festival up north as a competition with 3 other schools. We have been working on our PBL projects for 10 weeks now, and next week, next Wednesday, we have our PBL showcase where we will present to the whole school and community members what we've been working on for our 10 weeks and show them what we've been doing. For our town hall topics, our next town hall is hopefully on Friday if weather permits. And it is going to be, we're going to start trying to tackle the problems in the bathrooms at our school. Because for the last 2 years, we haven't been able to have the doors on the outside of the bathrooms because of vandalism, because of substance use in the bathrooms. So we're going to start tackling that. We expect it's going to take at least 2 town hall meetings to get through all of that. Because there's a lot of issues in the bathrooms, and we want as much student input as we can to get that solved. And
Great, thank you. Any questions? Comments? Yeah, please.
Yeah, are you participating in any of those things that you just mentioned?
what? Yeah.
Yeah, what are you participating?
I'll be auditioning for the show and the players, and my PBL that I've been working on is the Rockets PBL, where we're learning how rockets work and designing model rockets. And I just finished mine today.
Will you actually?
I'm launching next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday?
Yes.
What time?
In Onions Field.
T minus.
10-ish.
Just look into outer space and you'll see.
Hope there's no F-35s on that day.
Yeah, right. All right, thank you.
You have Ruth.
Oh, yes, Ruthie, thank you.
Can you make the
Oh, yeah, can,
sign-in thing go away?
yeah, please.
Sorry. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ruthie.
Hi, so a couple weeks ago, Dan, we had a private donor. I'm not sure we as the soccer team know who she is, but I don't know if she wants the community knowing who she is, because she did mention that she wanted it to be private, but then she told us. But we had a private donor take our whole entire soccer team, including the coaching staff, to the 4 columns to go out to dinner and stuff. So that was pretty amazing. And NHS has the Feed the Thousands going on. So we've also did a candy cane fundraiser and stuff. And a lot of our seniors that have applied to colleges are getting accepted. If you're there and you walk out through A level, then there's a wall when you're walking out. You can see who got accepted and stuff. So that's pretty cool. And I think that's about it.
All right, thanks, Ruthie. That's pretty exciting. It was very generous of somebody.
Yeah.
Very nice. We won't say. Great, thank you. All right, moving on to correspondence. I see that we have the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation well represented. Who's taking this? Is this Christy?
Hi
Christy.
there. Hi, everybody. I'm Christy Beatty, for those of you who don't know me, but I think I know most of you. I'm here with my colleague Jennifer Stromson, and thank you for letting us present to you again, give you a little update on the Pipelines and Pathways program. I'd first like to thank you so much for donating to our program. What an amazing thing this has been, because what's happened with your contribution, financial contribution, is that other school districts are now contributing as well. So as I've said, you've taken the lead in so many ways, and that was one of them. So I really appreciate that, being able to keep this program going, because I think it's a good one, and I think we have a lot to do. So you're all in receipt of the update that we gave you. It has a couple of pages of testimonials, and then it has an update on some of the highlights that we have. It looks like you all have that. Yeah, okay, great. Did everyone get a chance to watch the Reality Fair video, the BCTV Reality Fair video? Give me a thumbs up if you did. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's so good. I thought it came out well, aside from my second chin. It was just great to see, everybody coming together from all the different schools, and of course for you guys to take the lead on that again. So I'll have you then scroll into, after the testimonials and quotes, that third page of our update. And again, the Reality Fair, we had about 80 volunteers, and we had over 200 students attend from throughout Windham County. 70 of those were from Leland and Gray, and we got some great feedback for that. We had scheduled that event, I don't know if most of you know this, but in Brattleboro for the spring, and they weren't able to host it for a variety of reasons. And so the moment that I mentioned that we needed a venue and we needed a partner to do this, Bob stood up and said, yes, let's do it. And I think that's what I appreciate most about your school district, is that you are a yes and school. Anytime I bring something to you that's a good idea that's going to benefit the kids, you're open to collaboration. And I can't always say that for every school. I think what's great is you take your ego out of it, and we all just work together to make this happen. So again, I love working with you guys. So the Reality Fair was great. Right now we're also working on our fall, winter senior survival. We have informational interviews coming up, and I have a couple of kiddos who are actually scheduled to interview with CODA and CODA for real jobs, not just for the informational interview, because they want to be diesel mechanics. So that's pretty cool. And a variety of other really cool connections that the students are making. But what I wanted to really focus on is the future, and to let you know some of the work that I'm doing with Terry Davison-Berger, the Flexible Pathways Coordinator, as well as Sarah Grasso, your guidance counselor. I get to spend the day with them every Wednesday doing senior survival, and then really creating plans for the future. And two big things are on the horizon. One is that we're taking that senior survival curriculum that we created, and at the student's request, peeling off pieces of it so that it can start earlier, so that we can really start having kids explore careers, in 8th grade, in 9th grade, so that by the time they have hit their senior year, they're really polishing, and they're not at that stage of, what am I going to do next, that anxiety stage. And so I worked with Sarah Grasso today in identifying which of the modules from that senior survival can be pulled into various other years, teaching those modules during those years, and for each year having a culminating event that's big, like the Reality Fair or like the Sophomore Summit. So freshmen will have their own big event, sophomores, juniors, and seniors will also have their own big events. And what we would like is for Leland and Gray to be the hub for those events, because you've been so open to it. We'd love to invite other folks from Windham County, because this is a regional economy, and We want all of the students to benefit, but it's so easy to work with you. So that's what we're hoping for that piece and working on actively this spring semester coming up. And then the other piece that is attached to that is a teacher training curriculum. So really showing best practices for how to integrate career education into the everyday classroom. And those modules being taught by your folks, me, Sarah, Terry, your leadership, just as sort of serving as a model for the county and for the state of best practices for career education in our schools. So lots of cool things on the horizon. I would open it up to questions if you'd like. And then the last bit, we are here because we are asking for more money. And I wish I could do this. I'm an altruist, but not that much of an altruist. I do, so I'm hoping that we can continue to get funding from you. We're searching for other ways of funding the program in our 5th year for another decade, because really that's how we're going to shift the culture around career education. So that's my spiel.
Well,
Any
thank you.
questions?
Yeah, thank you,
Comments?
Christy. That was great. What specifically do you need in order to take care of all these next ups for Leland and Gray and P3?
Specifically in terms of support from your teaching staff, your leadership,
Financially.
or financial support. We're asking for $25,000 for the to be for your coming budget. That would be great.
That's great. And you said as a result of what we're doing, you're also seeing other schools join and participate?
Yeah, so your leadership has really, I mean, it set an example for the other schools. Your school and your outcomes are aspirational. And I sell that all the time to these other schools. I say, hey, if you work with me like Leland and Gray works with me, you too can have these outcomes. And they're starting to hear it. And that's because of your school's leadership. So I know Jen wanted to chime in here.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I just want to say it is also, as we go and look for other support, we ask all the schools to be part of supporting this, but we also go out for philanthropic support. So it's really been incredible to be able to demonstrate how this program can work with really a full partnership, and also that you have invested in this program. So we're talking to funders. That goes a long way. People love the idea of this kind of work, and but it's actually weirdly difficult to fund things at like a regional scale. And we've tried to make inroads. We really think this should be happening across the state, and this is a model that a lot of people have pointed to and talk about. And we just haven't. That's like the 20-year goal, is to figure out how to make this something that is really built into how every school can take career education forward. But for the next 5 years, we're just trying to kind of keep this going and kind of keep growing it incrementally. So yeah, what you're doing, your funding, but also like your outcomes, the commitment from top to bottom of your faculty and staff administration, faculty and staff, really illustrates that like magical things in terms of being able to say that every student leaves a school district with a plan, right? With a path forward. And that seems like something, I think people assume that that's what happens. But when we start, talking to kids, like we know that's not what happens. So what you're doing is so exceptional. And the way to get there is taken, a lot of people working really hard, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And I think it's, one of these, the reality fair in some ways was just like this moment where we all got to get together and really be like, this is really fun, exciting, impactful stuff. But the real program is every day, it's every week. And I think that's the other thing. You guys know that. I think for a lot of the other folks that are potential partners and funders, they think it's sort of like bright and shiny objects. It's an event here, it's a thing there. And it's, I think, the day in and day out work that your team understands and shows up to do and partners with Christy to do. That's really what it takes to get kids to the place where they leave with a clear path forward. I can't express enough our appreciation for your understanding of everything that goes into making that happen, and the kind of tirelessness of your staff to just do it.
I will echo that, and I also just want to say it reminds me that the employers and the folks who were at the reality fair came to us without any prompting and said, who is that first group of kids? Wow, they were really impressive. They really had their act together. And I said, well, it's the Leland and Gray kids. And I'll tell you why, because we came in and we did orientations with the staff, we did training with the kids, we did elevator pitches and networking, and I think really, knowing from the top down, from Bob all the way down, that this is really important, and showing that value, it just changed everything. So your kids were standouts, and it's really because of the buy-in. So yeah, I appreciate that so much.
Wow. Thank you, Christy and Jen. Any questions, folks? No? All right. Well, thank you very much. As you know, we are discussing our budget tonight, so we will certainly take that under consideration, and really appreciate you coming and sharing with us. And we've all heard about the partnership that you have. Terry speaks about you highly all the time, as well as others, so really appreciate it. So
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. Be well.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks.
All right, moving on to darkness. Old business. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of November 9th, 2022.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Sure.
Any discussion? Seeing none. I'll start with Zoom land. All those in favor say aye. Ken?
Aye.
Crystal?
Aye.
Yeah?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I'll abstain.
Aye. I'll abstain, actually.
Okay. All right. 2 abstentions, and how many in favor? 1, 2, 3. Got the count, Bill?
6.
We good?
Yeah, you got
Okay.
2 abstentions,
Yep,
you got 9 total people,
there we go.
you got.
7 and 2.
720,
There we go.
702. Abstention like a tie.
Yeah.
Like a tie. 702.
702, there we go.
702.
Motion carries. And let's see, approve the financials. Joe, yeah.
I got the numbers.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Second.
Asking for approval of one voucher at $210,980.99, and asking for approval of a voucher $3,253.92.
Second the motion.
Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye, starting with you, Ken? Okay.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Great beer, by the way.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
And aye. There we go. Motion carries unanimously. Very good. All right, long-term planning update, moving on to the feasibility study on the campus model.
Sure, Bob is gonna be a little late, he is at a performance for his child, so I'll take these 2 things. The feasibility study, so the board approved us engaging with a firm for a feasibility study. We engaged Stevens and Associates in October. We had our first meeting in November. They did a walkthrough of this building and a walkthrough of Townsend with the facilities individuals and the principals. And then a follow-up to that, they detailed out a very long list of clarifying questions, space issues, projected trends, a lot of data that had been collected from the earlier long-term planning committee. And tomorrow at 10 a.m., Stevens and Associates team will be meeting here, right, here? Here? Here at 10 a.m. to meet with the administrators, and Mike and Joe, are either of you going to be able to be there?
There's a virtual option, right?
Yeah.
I'll be on that.
At that time, they will reflect back what they have learned, do any other clarifying questions, and then I would expect that sometime in January, we might need an additional meeting for them to come and kind of share with the board. This is where we're at, this is what we found, kind of as an iteration, but I won't know until we meet with them tomorrow, and we'll communicate out. But it is in process, it is moving forward, and I would assume that you'll get a full board communication in January as to where we are and what further questions we have. The NEASC, the application is completed, right? Didn't we decide it was, yeah. So Bob led a team of the administrators and the director of curriculum to create the application for NEASC. And again, NEASC is going to be a third-party iterative process of looking at the scope of the academic and social offerings of our pre-K through 12 district. It'll be a process that will be 18 months in its first iteration, and then there's a 3-year check-in, a 5-year check-in, and a 10-year check-in. This timeline will be determined in the spring of 2023, so our first task is to turn in the application, which will be done in December, and then NEASC will come back and say this will be the timeline going forward. More than likely what will occur in the spring is there will be a team of district personnel that will receive some training about preparing for a visit in the fall, and a group from NEASC will come in the spring and do just a one-day visit to check over what was presented in the application to the reality on the ground before kind of the big process begins in the fall of 2023. So just to follow up that the board, after their long-term planning, made a decision to have a pre-K through 12 district, operate a high school, invest in a feasibility study for a one-campus model, and to engage NEASC into an academic programmatic study for long-term. So those are the 3 things that are being followed that came forward from the board.
Good. Thanks, Bill. Sure. Any questions on that? No? All right. On to the FY24 budget.
Right. So I'm going to start with the Wyndham Central budget. I've been bringing this on for all the districts. Some of you have seen or heard this for the 3rd time, so you guys can just shut down for a minute here. All right. So the Wyndham Central Board met on November 16th and reviewed this budget. Prior to that, we reviewed it with the officers as well. And this budget was unanimously passed on the 16th. So I'll start just with the narrative, and I'll try not to make this too long. We have a lot to talk about with your own budget. So overall, the superintendent's expenses were up 17.53%. Fortunately, revenues were up as well with the indirect funding that we're getting from the grants, particularly the increase in indirect from the ESSER grants that are coming through. So this allowed for an assessment increase of 2.55%. which is consistent with our 7-year average. It's a little higher than our average, which over the last 7 years has been 1.12% of the assessment. The technology part of the budget was up 21%. We did have to increase staff. The .2 was for Marlboro, and then the 1.0 was really for the West River District. And we increased hardware, software. As you all know, the inflationary factors are playing in here to every budget. The MTSS expenses, the multi-tiered system of support budget, which is special ed and also the academic support teachers, was up 7.79%. However, we are using fund balance to offset some of that increase. So the year-over-year assessment was 2.91 increase. The ECSE, which is early childhood special education expenses, were down 34.98%. And that's basically, and that is right now, there were no students in that age bracket needing a one-to-one service. So that was quite a reduction. You'll see the FTE changes here. I will point out that the one that affects West River the most at this point, because we're doing a pilot, we're really piloting the purchasing agent. So we hired a purchasing agent in the central office, and that position is purchasing all of the items for the elementaries. So that actually you will see a reduction in the West River budget because of the person who it was. So well, I can point that out at some point when we get to that. Let's see here. The notes here, okay. The board did approve also using a 2-year rolling average for the ADM. It's just another smoothing technique because, you know, ADM goes up and down, and it's not so much for West River because you're working with a larger number, obviously, but for some of the smaller districts, you know, if they lose 5 students or gain 5 students in a year, you know, their assessment can go up and down. So we're actually tying this to the state number, the 2-year average that starts off your equalized pupil number. So the board did approve to do that as well for anywhere where we use an ADM for assessment. We're using a 2-year rolling average. The fee for service was reviewed, but it was not voted on at this point. There's still moving parts in that one. And that is the high 30,000 foot overview. So does anybody have any questions on the WCSU budget? Good? All right, moving on. So we are going to look at the West River budget. So I handed the packet out to you, this packet here. The one I sent had through email had a very slight change in a calculation that I found was the cost per pupil for fiscal year 23. This is the correct number. I think I had 25,000 or something like that, but you have the correct one in front of you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Sure, that would be great. So the budget committee met to discuss, well, first the administrators and I met to discuss positions and what was needed, particularly in the, you know, the event that the grants are going away. And so we have some documentation here that I passed out that really backs up those positions that the administrators felt were vital to keep moving forward. The budget committee met and we really discussed those positions in depth and decided to put them into the budget. The first draft before these positions was somewhere in the vicinity of 3.5, 3.6%. So, did increase it to the 6.4% year over year. So those, we have the major increases, which are always the salary increases and change in personnel. That is also, to point out, it's really over a 2-year period, because last year we didn't have a settled negotiation when we did the budgeting. So that settled, and if there was a difference in what we projected for increases with what the reality was, there was a difference there. And then, of course, we have the salary schedule for fiscal year '24. Some benefit increases and change in personnel. Again, there was a lot of change in personnel. I have to tell you, we thought that the prior year was the largest turnover year. Last year, actually, for this year, was more. So, you budget for one thing, and depending on who you hire, the personnel and benefits can change drastically. The SU assessment, that's just to point out, it was an increase overall.
It's on page 7.
And it's on page 7 if you want to see the line by line.
Page 7 of your WCSU.
It's a summary.
It breaks out that 152,000.
We did discuss at the last meeting to put into the base budget the project-based learning, as that was grant funded, but the board really made a commitment to that at the last meeting. So that was in the original budget that the committee saw.
I can speak to the next one.
Great.
So I had an opportunity to go with our workforce development coordinator and our high school counselor for a tour of the Vermont EMS Academy to discuss partnerships and opportunities for our students. And one of the things that we were able to discuss would be to possibly partner with MEMSA for our students, probably the 17, 18-year-old age, that we could have a customized partnership with MEMSA to allow probably between 10 and 15 students. The details would still have to be worked out, but the availability for them to be able to take a course in an EMR first semester and an EMT as a continuation course second semester, with the availability of the training center so close, and the realization that a student who could take those courses, not only would they benefit the community, benefit themselves with the skills and the availability of having those transferable skills for the rest of their life, but they also, if they complete the EMT course and get a certificate, you're looking at anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 job worldwide for our 18-year-old graduates of West River. So I was extremely impressed, very supportive of the possibility of making this happen. And so I asked Lori, when she met with the administrators, to include this in the budget for the board's consideration.
And then we have a second elementary guidance. This is a shared between the MTSS budget and general ed. And the administrators felt that this was a vital position, and it would affect the special ed piece of it if it was not included, which is also vital. So the added considerations, and these were all formally grant funded, as well as the guidance above it was as well. The homeschool liaison, and you have a document that really describes what the homeschool liaison does. And then the second elementary nurse, and there is a letter there from Jorda, our Leland Gray nurse, that really describes the need for a nurse in a building. basketball times. And then after school. And this one here, after I met with the budget committee, I felt like we really needed to lay it out for the board, and so that's this document here. And we probably should dive in and talk about that while we're here. So the challenge is the fiscal year 24 funding. So if you recall, we had the 21C grant for the past 10 years. We don't have it for fiscal year 23 because we were not approved for it this year. And we're paying for it with part of the sustainability plan that we were required to have as a 21C program. So that's how the 2 sites are being paid for now. And of course, that will run out. Hopefully we won't overspend it, but that will run out at the end of the year. So the challenge is what to do for 24. So, you know, currently the 2 sites are at Jamaica and Newbrook. And any change in site venues would, you know, we'd need to research that with the director of ops and our transportation provider. So I laid out some options here, and I also gave you some expenses that are net of any program revenue. So the program does bring in some revenue that parents or guardians pay for. And then there are some small local grants that go towards it as well. The summer, which is, you know, we usually have around 45 participants, you know, that's a decent cost per student right there, you know, $1,000. The after-school programming is expensive at the average participation rate that is happening now, but also was happening when we had 21C, and that is part of why we did not get funded again, because our participation rates were low, which drives the cost up. Because you absolutely need a site coordinator at each site, and then your programs. So $2,900 is really pretty high. It needs to be somewhere in the $1,800 to $2,500, like $2,500 is the max to be approved to reapply for the 21C grant. So, you know, as you can see, that's an option 3. So the first option is to determine if the summer and after-school programs are essential to the schools and communities and fund the program 100% locally from fiscal year 24 going forward. This has been done in river valleys now. Both Dover and Wardsboro fund it locally, and also Marlboro. And then the second option would be to budget the $174,000 and apply for the ARP ESSER grant, which is a 2-year grant, and it's an expansion. It's only $60,000 per year, but it would help to potentially have a 3rd site. Okay? And your administrators, your elementary administrators, have committed to applying for this grant. So they are on it. The third is to budget a match of some amount in hopes of applying to the 21C grant again, which is it's a 50% match basically. And that's a 5-year grant. We have to be careful of supplanting, because if you budget if you budget more than what the federal grant will pay for, then you're supplanting. So we have to be careful of those rules. We would need to hire a project director because they won't fund it without a project director. Participation rates would need to increase to bring down the cost per student. So roughly we would need 50 regular after-school attendees. So if it's not awarded, we would have to fund it with fund balance, you know, whatever portion we didn't budget for. And the applications typically take 60 to 100 hours, and they can't be written by anyone outside of the district. So it has to be somebody with firsthand knowledge of the program. we couldn't hire a grant writer, that's what I'm getting at here. And we need a community partner. The fourth option is to sunset this summer and after-school programs. Or other options. We're open to them. What do you got? So that is the challenge that's on the table right now. The 127 is in this budget. So there was already 46, almost 47 budgeted. So this 127 is an additional amount in that. So questions on the after school before, that's a lot to digest. So
Lori, on the average participants of 42, is that just over the most recent year or over time?
that, it really is, those numbers are what I received from really the principals, the administrators gave me those numbers of what's happening right now.
Okay.
But I can tell you after talking to the director, the two directors prior, that that has been the average or less in the past few years. Probably like 5 years ago or so. When it first started, it was like, like 70, 80 kids. It was really a lot. And to give you just some context, Wardsboro has 49 students and they have 34 of their 49 participating after school, so 70%.
Have we done any research as to why we have such a low participation rate? It sounds like it's been going on for 5 years. What data set do we have to?
Yeah, it's programming. It's getting the right programs in that the students want to participate in. It's finding program leaders. So part of this is a, hiring issue. I don't know if you want to.
No, because we haven't done a formal survey out to parents. Why did you or did you not participate? We could do that.
It just seems like maybe we're offering the wrong program if we don't have anybody participating. So maybe it's not a.
I think that was done with the application process,
Yeah.
but
I'll look into it.
Is there any reason we have to have 2 sites? If we're talking about cutting the program because we can't afford it, would a single site be better than no sites?
There are no requirements for the number of sites, whether using 21C or using ARP ESSER or using local.
I'm just thinking that maybe 1 site is better than no sites. And
Yeah.
maybe 42 students at a single site is a viable program.
That's why there's option 5.
yeah, it depends on the cost of the programming, right? I mean, you have to, it's sort of, if you build it, they will come, because you have to have really solid programming, and then you would draw students from, if it were a single site at Townsend, we'll say, you would have to draw the students to there with programming. And so that's the key, is being able to do that.
Programming and transportation.
And, yeah. Sarah?
What about possibly expanding to include offer it to middle school students as well?
Well, that's actually something I don't have on here, but thank you for asking about that. Actually, the middle school received a grant. It's the ARP ESSER grant that the elementary administrators are going to apply for, and it's for 2 years. So they actually are, so they do have programming.
Okay. So it's run completely
It's
separately?
completely separate.
Okay. Thanks, Patty. That's awesome.
I was just going to comment on transportation because I believe, and maybe Bill can correct me, I believe that our transportation company can't offer transportation at 5:30 because.
No, I was talking about after school, getting to one location, not the end of the day.
Right. But the end of the day thing is an issue for families, for some families, not all families, but for some families who can't, then it becomes a hardship getting to the school to get their kids at 5:30. And because 5:30 is more than however many hours after the start of the bus driver's day, it's not legal for them to continue to drive in a single day. I think that's the way I understood it. So that becomes an issue, I think, especially as you move to even 2 sites or 1 site, because then there's further distance for families. But we haven't like formally asked parents, but that's always been my assumption as to why some families aren't taking advantage, is just, going out after dark to get the kids.
Go ahead.
Me? Okay. I want to put my parent hat on for a moment here, if I can. I would say, as a parent whose child has participated in this, the biggest drawback at times is the programming offered. I don't have a solution to that because I know we're looking for people to provide different programming. But I would say when I'm sitting down, and this comes from a person who doesn't need it as aftercare, who uses that as enrichment. So I can't speak for others that way. But the options are quite limited.
I was just gonna say, one other thing we talked about at the budget committee meeting was if we were to have it come down to 2 locations, that maybe Townsend and Newbrook would be more feasible based on the number of students that attend from each of the schools, 8 at JVS and then 25 apiece between Townsend and Newbrook. So if we were to do 2, that might make more sense. I think that was Dana's suggestion.
Yeah, if we're trying to get the most kids, get more out of them. I know that the Townsend parents were here a few meetings ago. They were really adamant about getting that after-school program back in. There was more of them. And I didn't realize we had to have like 50 to get.
Well, that's just the minimum.
That's just
where
the
I'm
minimum.
saying where we need, in order to apply for the 21C grant.
That's the most restricted grant.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's where I'm using a target,
Yeah.
go for the hardest one and then the rest is easy. That's just the minimum. I mean, we need almost 75% out of every school, almost, to really make this program really go
We have
and pay for itself.
approximately 200 elementary students, so we're looking for,
25%.
yeah.
So if we get to 70, that would be 140 students participating. Go ahead, Mike.
It'd be a
So,
wonderful challenge.
it seems to me like we might already have the model of what we're looking for if we just go back to like 5 years ago, because I remember TES had a vibrant after-school program, and then COVID and everything else, so I get it. But what's the difference in the programming that we're offering now versus what we were offering then that had all the participation? That's the question I want to know.
I can't speak to what the programming is.
But look into
It's
it.
the it's what Leanne was talking about. It's the availability of people to run programs that parents choose. I'd be happy to work to design some sort of interest survey, just to provide the board. It'll be for, talking about next year, kind of maybe programming you'd be interested in, and does 5:30 make a difference, or, I could design something that could be, it might be helpful.
Well, it's to let,
No, go ahead.
one of the things we discussed at the meeting was the let-out time of Townsend's earlier than Newbrook and Jamaica.
Sure.
And it wouldn't be fair to the Jamaica kids or the Newbrook kids who wanted to come to Townsend. If that's where we did the program, you would have to make adjustments to make it equitable all the way across
Yeah,
the
we have to
district.
understand why are those times the way they are, and is there a way to adjust it?
Mhm.
But I mean, if you did one site, right now, Townsend gets out the earliest.
Yeah.
So imagine you don't change any times at all, but you ran it till 5:30.
Mhm.
So the Townsend, students that are located at the Townsend location would start it, yes,
Yeah.
half an hour earlier than students at the Newbrook location. If they came over at 3:15 instead of 2:45.
Mhm.
And the Jamaica location, same thing. It's just, do we have that transportation? It doesn't seem insurmountable. I'm happy to look into the transportation stuff. I'm happy to do a survey, a kind of a programmatic survey to parents, if that would be helpful for the board.
I know when Jamaica was teaming up with Wardsboro, they kind of had it going there. travel time ate up a lot of their participation time.
Well, those were also when they ended at 4:30,
Yeah,
right? So if it goes to 5:30 and
5:30.
I arrive at 3:20, changes my viewpoint of the value of it.
it'd be more valuable.
Go, Lindsay.
I was just wondering if we've had any feedback from the first session, and with the increased hours, how it's all 5 days now. I know that these are changes that seemed to be important to people, and I'm wondering if there's been feedback about that, and if there's is that helping to increase participation? Because if you can now actually use it as aftercare, as opposed to signing up for it and then being like, well, I still have to cover the rest of the time.
Sure. I could add that to kind of a programmatic, I could do a programmatic feedback if you participate in this one, feedback from the current structure. And then just present that data so as the board is making these decisions, you have something. Would that be helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I will do that.
And then also at Wardsboro, so if they have 70% participation, is their programming really good? And if so, what is it? That's kind of some real-time data as opposed to looking back to,
Can we just
what did we
copy
do
that?
5 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
A lot of community support, they have a lot
Yeah.
of parent support. and
I'm sorry?
They have a lot of parent support and community support. So,
So we need to sell this. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I saw some hands out there.
In talking to Mariah, the director at my site, she's really struggled to, if she puts out there, would you like to come in a couple days a week and teach a class? And it's really, the content ends up being driven by the person rather than like us deciding we wanted a babysitting class and then find the staff for it. Because really it's about not being able to find staff to come in for an hour and a half. Which is, it occasionally matches really nicely with someone's lifestyle, but not always. So it used to be that when I first started, it seemed like the teachers were more interested in the work. And it doesn't seem like that's the case as much anymore. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but it seemed like the teachers were, and maybe that's because it was a little bit shorter, but it is a long day to come in. Most of my teachers are there at 7:15, and then to stay until 5:30 is a pretty long day for anybody. So.
I wonder if it may be beneficial, and I don't know how this works technically, but for somebody who is in charge to design I know you're looking for like, okay, who can volunteer and what are your interests and let's do something. But that may be intimidating to volunteers who are like, I don't have the time. I'll happily come in for a couple hours and do a thing, but I'm not designing curriculum here, So it may be intimidating to be put in charge of that. And you may get more participation if you give somebody more or less look, we've done the lesson plans for you, we need you to come and make kids excited about it.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to sort of connect, we had our family survey go out and just a lot of the parent comments that came back were to bring after-school programs back to Townsend. So I don't know if the numbers show that. It seems to us that less of our students at Townsend are participating this year because it's not at our school, but I don't know if that's actual data. And then something else I was thinking of, I don't know if this would help increase participation. I know, as a parent for me, it would be super helpful. Could we expand it to the half days as well? It'd be tough if teachers were the program leaders, but I know that's a need for our families.
Thank you. So Lori, it sounds like it didn't make a difference that we moved, right? The numbers remained relatively the same. If we're at 42 now, you said it's been trending about that.
right, yeah, when
So-
we applied for the grant, I think the cost per student, now we were building up, we were trying to build up the program in the application. And it was like $3,300. And that was one of the reasons that the grant did not get funded. Because you know, you're trying to build it up, but you can't, you have to use the data that you had for participation. So, you know, so that it has been difficult over the past few years. The after-school program has been difficult.
Yeah, good.
What's the purpose of the program? Is it additional education? Is it to help students do opportunities, aftercare for parents? Like, what's our goal that we're trying to achieve?
So under 21C, when we received the grant, we had very specific measures. Without that, it can be whatever is decided by the board. It could be after-school care, it could be,
That's the
you know what I
question.
mean?
What is our goal?
Yeah.
And are we trying to provide childcare till 5 p.m.? Are we trying to provide an educational curriculum? Like, I think that we have to know what we're trying to provide.
Yeah.
It's a great question. Are we restricted with 21C? In other words, could we have somebody who's not an educator, or somebody come in and teach folks about their profession or something like that?
Yeah, sure. It's just, you have, when you accept the federal money, you have federal rules.
Right.
So you have to have the site director. You have to have pre and post data that is from federally accepted assessments. So SBAC has to be part of the data, and you have to have opportunities for academic. It's not enrichment, it's not acceleration, and it's not direct teaching. It is,
Maintain.
and it's not homework club. It is.
It's something.
It is academic.
Stimulation.
No. It's a very specific academic component that cannot look like Drew and I hanging out here and 6 kids doing their homework.
Yeah.
But it goes back to Lindsay's point. It has to have a lesson plan, and it has to be organized and taught in a way that can be demonstrated when you hand a lesson plan in for your audit of receiving the federal money. So, I mean, Drew's point is great, because it's, in general, what's the point? I would say under 21C, we didn't really have to think about it, because we had to follow the requirements. And because we found out late about not having it, it was just, do we have the money to run something? So I don't think we definitely don't know the answer to that question.
And that only applies if we go with option 3 on the page, that we have rules to follow, right?
Correct.
So if we're picking any of the other options,
Well, I think the ARP application also asked for like curriculum alignment with the programs.
thank you.
It's not as restrictive as that, but it does have that component.
Okay, so one none, 2 some, and 3 many.
So it is in this presented budget right now. So just keep that in mind as we work our way through. I think we have to revisit it and do some more.
I will do
Yeah.
a survey. I'll design it the best I can and get some feedback and data for you all as you consider this.
Okay, I was just gonna say, fair to say we don't have enough information at this point to make a decision on it. What's the latest we can hold up to this?
Whenever you're ready to,
Whenever you vote the budget.
right, whenever you're ready to approve the budget.
Okay. All right, any other questions or thoughts that we wanted to ask for next time? Ken, can't see out there. If you have anything? Nope.
You guys have-
Nothing.
Nothing? Okay, thanks, Ken. All right.
All right,
Great.
so I'll keep
Move on.
going?
Yep,
Okay.
thank you.
And then $100,000 for additional deferred maintenance. You guys really very wisely a couple of years ago put $150,000 in the budget for deferred maintenance. That $150 for fiscal year '24, 90% of it will go towards paving. So there really won't be much left for any type of work on any buildings, other than the normal maintenance that happens. This is above and beyond the normal maintenance. I do have a thought about this 100,000. you could, another way to do this is to pull it out of the budget, which would get you down below 6%. It would be just below 6%. And you could ask the voters to move some operational reserve into capital. So you could put something on your articles to do that, a question on that. So that's another way to move some money over to capital, because you know, that obviously you've seen all the work that's been getting done with the 150 that you gave the Director of Operations to work with, and then the 150 for this year. But next year, it's really, most of it will go towards paving.
Gotcha.
How much is in that fund?
So if you look at the fund balance, this is the projected fund balance from the auditors. The audit is not quite finished, but feeling pretty comfortable with this. So we'll jump over here and talk about this. So the general fund, your operating fund, is, you have the 79,000 that was left from the 150 is assigned there. I had you vote it to move it to the capital, but I shouldn't have done that. So I had to just reassign it in the general fund. So that's why there's 79 there. And then the reserve fund, your operational reserve fund, is at 783. And then there is 51,000 in capital. The biomass, which is now the water project, that's restricted to that. And then the food program, we'll talk a little bit about that. There's so many moving parts here. The universal meals, which is in effect right now, the word on the street is that it will become law going forward. We don't know that for sure. But what I did in your general fund budget is I kept the contribution that the general fund makes to the food program the same, even though the expenses went up in the food program. And that's on this sheet here. So you'll see this. But what I did is I used some of this fund balance to level that out. So about 66,000 to level that out. We did find that we are not allowed to have more than 3 months of operating costs carryover. So just found that out.
In the food program, or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
From year to year.
From year to year
Gotcha.
carryover. You can't have more than 3 months of operating. So by using this money, and then I know that Greg and Jake do have some plans for some of the money as well to upgrade down there. So, and then the rest are grants or special revenue. But your main ones that you're looking at are general fund, reserve fund, capital, and food. Those are really what interact together with the general fund.
Good.
So is there a negative from your suggestion of taking that 100,000 from the reserve fund to cover the deferred maintenance? Why wouldn't we do that? What's the downside of that?
There's no downside. I mean, it's just about how it's presented in the budget. You can present it as a transfer to the capital fund, and it's a line item in your budget. Or you can ask the voters to move it from the operational fund to the capital fund, and that reduces your expenses. So your year-over-year expenses are a little bit less. So because they're not paying, you're not raising taxes for it by doing that.
I kind of like that idea because I think it highlights to the public that we're taking initiative to improve our facilities. And it puts it out there as an article. Hopefully the press jumps on it and asks for an explanation, so we get an opportunity to say, look, we're taking care of these buildings that we have. So I kind of like that idea.
Completely agree.
As opposed to like burying it in the budget somewhere.
Yeah, transparency.
I mean, you could take out the other 150 that is in there and say, 250, So that would reduce your reserves down a little bit more. So this way, I'm just thinking you're splitting it, you know, you have one line item in the budget and one you're doing as an article.
So
Yeah.
one is being raised in taxes.
Right.
And one is using your reserve budget to do the work. And what you're saying is that the projection is $250,000 of work. Do you want to put $250,000 into the budget? Do you want to put 100 and 150, or do you want to do 250 out of the reserves, which is what, 783?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Only thought I have on that is, what can they do this spring? Do we want to not hold off on some of that until FY '24? Like, do they have enough to get through June 30 of next year?
I believe all the projects are planned out and accounted for in this year's budget right now. If you were to give, well, there may be some additional expenses going to happen anyway because of the fire
Yeah, we just got it.
inspections that just came out. So, so there may be some overspending in this year's budget as well. And so to talk about this year's budget and where you're coming out, projections for the end is, you know, roughly around a couple $100,000. I think that you'll have a surplus. So if there is some overspending, you know, there's money there to absorb that.
Okay.
So, just for clarification, what is like the minimum comfortable reserve? Like, I understand the importance of having a reserve in general, that we wouldn't want to use all $783,000 of this. What is a comfortable minimum based on what our budget generally is? What is that number?
5 to 10%.
Yeah, you know, it's different for different boards of what they feel comfortable with. There are boards that want $1 million on a, you know, very small budget. But, you know, 5 to 10% is usually sort of a rule of thumb. And it's, you know, this operational reserve can also be used to smooth out your tax rate as well. So you can also ask the voters if, I mean, you can see with this, we haven't even gotten into talking about the yield yet, but you can see with this budget, you're actually down 5 cents with a unified tax rate, right? So at this point, I wouldn't recommend using any of the reserve to bring the tax rate down lower, depending on what happens with CLA, right? This is before CLA. But it also is an extremely high yield. Now, I warned last year, right, that never seen a yield this high, and the average is 12, and here it is up again. But on Friday, you know, I went to my association's meeting, and Brad James clearly stated that the surplus in the ed fund is going away. It will not be there. And so that's why I give you the comparison down at the bottom of if you have an average yield of $12,000, because 2 years ago it was $11,385, okay? These are what your tax rates are gonna look like. And when we start to talk about, but wait, there's the weighting study in fiscal year 25, that is not the, you know, hole-in-one that everybody thinks that it's going to be, because you still need to raise the same amount of money for the ed fund based on spending, right? So they will just adjust the yield to, and Bill and I went
It was
to-
great, they
yeah.
did a math. So the easiest way I understand it is, when you do the weighting study, everybody's weights are going to increase one way, shape, or form. They just are. So if you have 1,000 equalized pupils, the weights have all increased. So like the poverty weight went to a 3, it was 1.25. So for every student that is deemed how the state decides, across Vermont, you have 45% of students receiving free and reduced lunch across the state. Those 45% of those students, of which we have 80,000, were a 1.25 equalized pupil. They are now going to be a 3.08 equalized pupil. Well, we're gonna add all this back up, but then they take the actual number of students. So we're gonna have equalized pupils, that's gonna be like 140,000 equalized pupils. And we're gonna have really 77,000 students. And so all they do is they take that total and they multiply it by the equalization ratio, which is just using that as a denominator. So
So they're gonna raise all this and then put it back to where it was?
it's just not gonna be the large leap
Right.
that,
In the future, do we have an elementary school teacher set these formulas instead of the calculator teachers?
Yes.
Like, I'm just thinking that
1 plus
the
1.
third grade teacher would have this figured out without any trouble at all.
In a heartbeat.
the
Yeah, no
point
kidding.
being, yes, the weighting study is gonna be instituted in FY '25. Yes, West River will benefit from the appropriate weighting, but it is not gonna be Jack in the magic beanstalk climbing up and collecting golden,
Right, it's still gonna be on
whatever,
average.
whatever metaphor I'm working on.
It's still gonna be on average 7, 8, 9, 10 cents off the tax rate.
Well,
Maybe.
We'll see.
We'll see.
It depends on
But
what
what-
they do with the
I'm
yield.
committing nothing.
But,
Yeah, it really is, so, I mean, I have some of the numbers.
Yeah.
And, you know, I will be getting more numbers in the next couple of weeks. And we can look at that because we still need to look at it for long-term planning, right? We need to look at that to make decisions, even for fiscal year '24, looking ahead to '25. But with the numbers I have, it was literally 3 cents less than your tax rate right now. Okay, so it's not, that's why I'm trying to get everybody to understand this is, and that's using a $12,000 yield, right? It's not using the yield that is today. I'm using a realistic yield. So just so you understand that it's not, just not going to be what everybody built it up to be.
go ahead, Mike.
Have you guys heard anything, any updates on the excess spending penalty? Is that gone for good? Is it coming back?
That's through
It's
FY
gone through
28,
29.
29.
But even with these new weights, West River was over the penalty, of today's penalty. So, not next year's. Not as much, but over still.
During the implementation of the weighting study, also a study will be done about whether that mechanism should be continued or an alternate mechanism should be implemented prior to.
They'll find a way to make it worse.
So, you brought up the food service budget. I know they were having town hall meetings discussing food, and did all of the student recommendations get reflected in the current budget proposal?
I know that some did, I don't know if all did. I think that there were, certainly the food costs, not only are the food costs up from the previous year, or the previous fiscal year '22 spending, quite a bit, right? The actuals were the 110 and I budgeted 211. So some of that is just inflationary, and then some of it is the quality of the food. I think that there's some other equipment that's being purchased about that as well. The surplus can't be used for the building piece of things, so that would have to come out of the capital. But, since I know there was some suggestions on rearranging the, I don't know, you probably know more than I do as far as that's concerned. You tell me this.
The recommendations for the cafeteria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a lot of recommendations on rearranging the stuff and how it's lined up in there, because lines have been a problem. People bumping into each other, trying to work around each other, because it's a very small kitchen space. We have a lot of students all going in at the same time. So people wanted to maybe, because during COVID we had people go around through the back stairwell, and then it just makes like one orderly line that goes, because right now you're going in and out the same door, and it's just a lot of bumping into each other. And they wanted to just spread out the different stations that we have for food to help with less crowding.
Thank you. So I did put in, so you'll see the equipment has been increased. So that's part of that, is Jake has something with the making a line. I'm not exactly sure. They come and they tell me these things, but I can't visualize them, so. But we built that into the budget, and also, I told the food service manager that we would keep that in there every year, because then he can start replacing. There hasn't really been a good equipment budget in the food budget, so now every year there's money to replace something. So that's the commitment, part of the commitment.
Great. I just want to make sure that the, you know, the work that our town hall and our students are doing is actually getting reflected in our plans.
That's great.
Just as a side note to that, I love that is happening, and would love to see, I know it wouldn't necessarily look the same, but a similar type of feedback though from elementary students, because I'm sure that the elementary schools could benefit from some feedback as well.
Go ahead.
Right now, the town hall is exclusively high school, so we're also looking into including middle school into those meetings to get feedback across the board.
That's great. All right, so besides after school, and let me just want to, I'm sorry, did you want to, go ahead. I interrupted. Go ahead.
I'm
Why am
like,
I-
we just barely got through the How's everybody's schedule doing? I just wanted to point out a few more things on the summer camp. I think that, you know, I'm available for questions anytime, so as you look through the detail, because I'm sure questions will come up. Equalized pupils lost 19.13, so that's a bummer, but that is reality. So obviously the cost per pupil is up 11.6%. So, but the unified tax rate is down by 5 cents, and then I'm not sure what the CLAs will do in your towns. You probably have a better idea of that than I do at this point. I do know that those CLAs are a 3-year running average, so your better year is dropping off. So I expect them to go down, but I haven't seen any CLAs yet.
January 15th is the earliest that we've got.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
The unified tax rate being down is because the yield is up so high.
Correct.
That's the only reason.
That is the only reason, which is why you have those
Because,
two.
look at the expenses.
Yeah.
So the
Why-
expenses are up 6.4%, but it's this yield that we may or may not get to keep.
It looks likely this year.
Right.
Looks unbelievably not likely next year.
You can quote that next year. Unbelievably not.
I mean, it's just, you can't have that amount of revenue 2 years in a row. They've equalized their projections, right? So they have this massive amount of revenue that came from two things, COVID and starting to collect taxes on internet purchases, right? So the law changed. So it was difficult to project. So then they project again, and they got it down from 130 to 64. Well, that shows that they're getting much better at projecting what it's gonna look like into the year that they're gonna be instituting the weighting study, which they are gonna really be flexible with that. So, yes, I would say this is the last year you're gonna see a yield decide.
But we're confident this year, we're not gonna get a surprise
Oh, no,
at
no,
town
no.
meeting day
No, it-
that they drop this back to 12,000 and we look at the 14%.
I don't think they'll drop it back that low. There is a possibility. I will say that at our meeting on Friday that the JFO is very conservative when they're putting out that December 1st letter and the yield. So typically, we've seen the yield only go up. I don't know that I personally have seen the yield go down in any year. It can happen though.
Yeah, it has not happened in
Right.
6 years.
So to put it in perspective, you know, your budget's up 6.4%, but ed spending is up 8%, right? So, and that's the piece that drives the yield. And part of that's because there's some loss of revenue as well, so.
Average across the state is 7.7% to 8.65%. They wouldn't give us the number, they gave us the range.
Also, we're below average? That's not good.
Well, it depends.
Boy, in this respect, depending on how you look at it, right?
No, you have the highest cost per student in your cohort. So out of 48 unified union schools, you guys are number one.
It's great to be number one.
That's what I told Brad when he told me the news, so I said, hey, we're gonna be number one is something. The average was around 18 to 19 from there.
Boy, we're number one by so much. Wow.
Yeah, in your cohort, so this is not the whole state, right? This is the unified union school districts in the state, which you're one of 48. So.
How do they compare as far as ADM to us? Like, is it because we just have the lowest ADM of them all?
It's all about the ed spending number and the cost per pupil, so.
Yeah, it's, when you have elementary schools that feed into one high school, and you don't, with that system, that's your cohort.
Right.
They don't care if you have 2,000 students or 300 students.
Right.
But isn't what Mike's saying true, though, that our scale, because of our scale, we're more expensive?
Right.
Well, when you drop 18 equalized pupils 1 year over year, you're talking almost 4%. And your expenses went up 6%. So just look at those two things. Your equalized pupils drop, your expenses go up. Those are the two numbers that are that's the third grade teacher. Right? Just those two numbers.
And you don't have any control
Right?
over those.
We can't, you can't control the equalized pupils, you can control the ed spending, you can't control the yield, and you can't control the CLA. So you got 1 out of 4 major things.
So there's some fun charts and things like that I will go into. But just gives you an idea of where the money is being spent. I think that that's always important as we look at, the first chart is the objects, so, salaries, benefits, all of those things. I put some notes in there if I saw that for the 5300s, the purchase technical and professional, that includes your after school. We did increase enrichment across all of the elementaries, and then the contribution. The $25,000 for
EDCC
is already in here, so I didn't consider that an increase because it was in last year's budget. You guys put it in last year. So those are some numbers for you to look at. The next page is, this is actually a really nice way to look at the budget by function. So when you really don't want to go through the detail line by line, this tells you, basically by department, all of the different, the spending there. And so, more than 60% is really being spent direct, or 58% is direct instruction. And that does not include, because you're going to see that in a different area, that doesn't include the, am I going to include it? Yes, no, it does include the MTSS model, the special ed and the MTSS. It does include that as well. And then you have your detailed budget from 4 to whatever number. And I did put some notes where I felt like there was some, we did reduce the amount of tuition, Act 166 students, which is the 10 hours a week. And that's just really looking at what was actual, but still doing some amount of planning of how many preschoolers are out there. Under the principal's office, you'll see where there was a reduction there, and that was what I was referring to in the Wyndham Central budget. Really tried to increase or make adjustments for inflationary factors, you know, the supplies and the fuel and that type of thing. We did do some adjustments there. I will tell you, this is a very exciting thing. Operation of buildings, the electricity from all of the retrofit work that has been going on, really felt like we could reduce that down. So that was really nice to see. Other than that, you'll see a lot of increases and decreases across all of the departments in the salary and benefits, and a lot of that has to do with the change in personnel and the turnover. Does anybody have any questions on the detailed budget? I know you probably haven't had time to really devour it. We did put in the $18,000 under Board of Education on page 12 for the NEASC. Bob said that it was next year will be the expensive year for that process. I think it's when they come and review, right? Is that what he said, right?
Bob says yes.
Bob says yes. Hi, Bob.
Is there, just to clarify a little bit, that purchasing agent part, what does it translate to coming from WCSU to us? I see that we're reducing by, 25,042, right? So that's,
Right.
what's the bill out to WCSU there? Is it dollar for dollar?
No.
Did we save money?
No,
Did we-
you're saving
Did we
money.
spend money, like?
Right, because
I'm just-
the position is a central office position, so it's really working with all of the districts. But it also, partially because of who it was that we hired, but also partially because we're able to reduce some days for the administrative assistants, and also they can now focus more on the school and the staff and the students rather than doing the purchasing, the POs and all of that.
So do we have a dollar for dollar on that?
I'm not
What it
sure
would be
which-
coming, so WCSU is billing out to our district, we're paying X number of dollars to WCSU for that position.
Oh, so whatever percentage
So-
your
So when
your
it says it's,
assessment is. Where's my?
You're 65%.
Yeah, roughly.
okay. So I'd have to look in here and figure out what that number is and do the math. I can look it up. I was just curious if we're saying here the number that we're reducing is 25,000, I didn't know if what we're billing out, we're being billed.
Well, your
to
assessment is
WCSU.
only up 2.55% in Wyndham Central, so it's not going to be a dollar for dollar savings. It's actually, if we're only billing out, or we're only increasing your assessment by 2.55%, right? And then it's 65% of that. Come to a WCSU meeting and ask the
It's about
questions.
1.7.
Right? I mean, that's really, to understand this budget, you have to start at the beginning and really understand it, because we're an SU, not an SD. So. Yeah, I think is it 60? 64, you were close. 64. That 2-year average got you.
Okay, fair enough.
I think so.
Have we reached the end of the line?
You tell me.
So we usually get a breakdown of what we think the impact's gonna be on each town. Does that come next month?
Yeah, it's because I really don't have any clue as to CLAs. That's what.
That's always the fun one.
That's the breakdown.
That's our favorite document every year.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't include it because
We know why you didn't
I thought
include
that this
it.
was gonna be a really long meeting because of this budget anyway. But that will be next month. I'll have a better idea, and they should be out, just about out.
Yeah, the 15th is usually the date they shoot for. We meet on the 11th, so we'll have, they usually try to give the business managers a indication
Yeah.
before. Yeah.
Nice.
Just, what other, $26,520 with an average in our cohort of 18 or and change. We do know that we have to do something about that, right?
Yeah.
This-
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, and that's.
We
that's
can't
the-
ignore that forever.
No.
That's the feasibility study, that's the moving towards a one campus, that's all of that, NEASC, et cetera.
Yeah, I think one campus would have been a good idea. I wish somebody had suggested that.
Sooner. Yeah.
Agreed. All right, so anything besides after school, and what did we decide on the 250K? Did we,
On the capital.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know that you came to a consensus.
okay.
We have 150 budgeted,
Right,
and
so,
we have 100 suggested outside of the budget through a article to the public to continue the capital project.
Does that make sense this year if we're certain the yield is going to stay this high?
So in this question, it would be, do you want the 100,000 to expend on the buildings?
Or if we're thinking that it's very unlikely the yield is going to drop significantly next year,
Very
do we want to save that reserve to help buffer that huge gap, which is between 15,400 and 12,000 next year when the yield drops?
And if you ever needed money, you know it's there.
So I just, again, using.
You're pre-committing to spend 100K, which reduces your, from 783 to 683.
And this yield thing is scary.
It's very scary.
very scary.
And if we, if this goes back to 12,000, I mean, these numbers we're looking at are huge. And the impact on taxpayers are huge.
If you kept your 783 and your unaudited expectation is 175, then you're looking at close to $1 million in that reserve going into the very
Reset year.
unlikely yield remaining year.
FY25, yeah.
It may be something to think about, just because of the information that we've been provided. Since we started this conversation, they're very unlikely.
Very unlikely.
That's gonna be a huge hit if we don't have any way of buffering it, and I hate buffering out the tax rate.
So you're saying hold the fund balance, if not increase it, and,
So no, don't do
Cool.
a
So
separate
just
article is what I.
Cut that
Pull
100.
the 100 out is what you're saying, right?
Well, I'm kinda leaning towards, because the yield is so high, leaving this the way it
I
is,
thought you wanted 150.
anticipating that we're gonna need that fund balance next year in the very unlikely situation that the yield stays this high. Because the yield, which we don't control, there's nothing we can do about that. They drop the yield next year, our budget is going to, or our tax impact is gonna be so much higher, and we're not gonna be able to do anything about it. Other than destroy programs for kids, which none of us wanna do. So I'd rather not be sitting at this table next year with a yield at 12,000 going, how do we cut $1 million out of this budget? All at once. So it may make sense for us to just hold on to that fund balance, take advantage
Yeah.
of a unusually high yield for this particular budget cycle, and come up with a good solid plan for next year.
yeah. And that doesn't preclude us from, if Greg comes with what we need for next year, we have fund balance,
And that's
it's still there.
access.
We can tap into it,
And-
so, yeah.
Lori just corrected me.
We already
She's
have the
appropriately
$250,000
budgeted that
in the
250
budget.
already. It's
This
not
is just
150 and we need that 100.
Right.
That 100 was
It was just
It's in
another
there,
way to do
another
it.
mechanism.
It was
Yeah.
another
Right.
mechanism if you wanted to drop your expenses below 6, you know, so. But you're absolutely correct. Take advantage of your high yield. This is, you did it last year as well. So, there will be a time coming, a reckoning.
And yeah, you're right. Next year at this time, you'll feel better if you have $1 million rather than 600.
Yeah. And Lori's always frugal anyway, so we'll have a fun balance. Additional.
You should, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anything else we need to ask for next time?
Are we completely staffed? Were we able to hire all the staff members we budgeted for this year?
No, that's part of the reason we don't have
Social worker?
There was a position hired for that, but at a lesser.
Right.
Instrumental music?
After part of the year.
Yeah,
Instrumental music.
is not going.
I guess my follow-up question to that is, are there any positions that we did not fill this year that we've now determined are not essential because we've come up with other solutions?
The one-year solution for the social worker is not as good of a solution as having a social worker. And the cost savings for that solution is less than 20% of the total cost, so I wouldn't recommend that. And the instrumental music is incredibly important and not overly expensive for the slice that you use. The challenge is getting somebody. We had somebody retire, we couldn't find somebody that fed a slice. But other than those two positions, those are the only backfills that we've been doing for service.
It was noticed on the instrumental.
Yeah, it's crushing. Because they feed into a very strong program, so.
All right. Any other questions? Thoughts for next time? Lori, great job, as always. Thank you. Amazing. Lizard of paper.
Yes. And you all computers, so you don't.
Yeah, right.
It would be the end.
Okay. So we did have an opening here for public comments, and I don't know if we have any public comment. Seeing none. Okay, utility truck conversation.
Get to hear from me again. Okay. So this is a fun one, you guys, okay? So, back when the food program started, when you all formed a district, the Leland and Gray food program, or West River, was also serving Wardsboro. So in order to do that, they needed a van. So at the time, I went to lease a van, and because West River was a newly formed entity, they had no credit rating. So Wyndham Central had to lease the van for West River. And so it's all been getting billed to you, but through Wyndham Central. So Wyndham Central actually owns the asset. The van, we no longer serve Wardsboro. And the van is really not, well, I think it's a two-wheel drive and it will never make it up Wyndham Hill in the winter. So that's one issue. And it's really not used in the same capacity. I think the Director of Operations has used it, you know, transporting stuff, but it's not really the right vehicle for what they need. So Wyndham Central Board voted, and they agreed to pay off the lease early, which is around $11,000. And they agreed to sell the asset to West River for $11,000, in which we have a trade-off allowance already of $19,000. So West River makes money on the trade, and to potentially purchase a utility truck for West River. And so this truck would be used, you know, to transport furniture back and forth. Really, everybody's using their private vehicles is what's happening, and they're not putting in their mileage either. So I have no way to tell you that, you know, it will save on mileage. If they were to put in like they're supposed to, it would save on mileage. But we really shouldn't necessarily have people using their own trucks to do that. And also, the Director of Operations would also like to use it, not for this winter, but potentially next winter, to save on some plowing and sanding. So, but that involves a plow and a sander. So that may be coming down the pike. But for right now, the question or the ask is, would West River Board like to buy the van from Wyndham Central at the lease payoff rate? And I don't have the exact figure, but it's really a general motion if that were to happen. And then the follow-up motion would be to allot a certain amount of money, which, yes, would come out of the surplus that we're projecting for the end of the year. He did have one all priced out, but it's now sold. So, you know, it's one of those things where we can't come back to you in a timely manner to say, okay, will you, approve this amount if you approve it all. So really need a range as to what we can spend. So those are the questions.
Go ahead, Ken.
I move that we buy the van from, or the truck from West River, buy it to West River from the WCSU.
So that's the first motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Well,
Discussion?
you,
Go ahead, Ken.
we don't need the second motion yet. We gotta have, first we have to have the truck before we trade it in.
But we still need a motion with a first and a second.
Yeah.
Which we have. So
Ken's
any
ahead
discussion
of
on
us.
that, Ken?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Seeing none, all those in favor, starting with you, Ken?
Aye.
Crystal?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Motion carries unanimously. And the second one, sorry. go ahead.
What was the estimate that you had on the last truck?
That was my next question.
Okay, what's the range?
It was a 2018 Ram ProMaster, and the sales price was $36,000, and so the trade-off allowance was $19,000 out of that. So it would have been a great deal, but so.
Was that with the plow and the sander? No.
No.
So you're looking for like net of 20, net of 30, what are you looking for a number?
Well, if the trade allowance holds, right, and I don't know, they shouldn't change it too much, then I would say probably with trade, 45,000 is what I'm thinking, somewhere in there.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, starting with you, Ken?
Aye.
Crystal?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much.
Go get a truck.
This will make some people very happy.
It's been an ongoing issue this whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, whenever we have to move anything, it's who's got the truck?
Mhm.
It's just not right. I don't have a truck.
And prior to the Director of Operations, the facility manager here never put in, use his own truck as well. And so really, we don't have any idea of how much it will save. But it's just, you know, people either need to put in their mileage or need to provide a truck. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori. All right, moving on to principal reports. Let's start with Leland and Gray. Mr. Tebow.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing up there?
Good, how about you?
Doing great. Sitting down in the basement where it's cold, so I got my hat on, but I was able to see my 11-year-old's concert, so I appreciate the ability to do this on Zoom.
Nice.
You have my principal report. If there's any questions on that, I can answer. I can give you more of an update on the principal search, which I think is what Bill had written on here, an update around the Townsend principal search. So, but I'll take questions on my report first, or do you want me to jump right into that?
Might as well jump right in.
Okay. So the principal, the Leland and Gray principal position was posted just after Thanksgiving. We have a process in place which is similar to the process that was used when I was hired, which is a steering committee made up of myself and Jen will represent sort of central office. And we have 2 high school teachers, middle school teacher, 3 support staff from different groups. We have 2 students, middle and high, on the steering committee. In fact, one of them is in the room with you there. And we have a member of our Principal Advisory Council parent as well. That group will be the screening group of applications and development of questions. Each of the stakeholder groups will have a short interview session on the day of the interviews, and so the candidates that are selected to come will come for a full day, and we'll sit with different groups throughout the day. So a parent group, a student group, support staff, professional staff, and administration / central office. So there'll be a whole process they go through. They'll spend time in classes, observing, hang out in the lunchroom, the whole 9 yards. And then each of those panels will meet, and then the members of those panels who are on the steering committee will report back to the steering committee to make recommendations based on that, as well as reference checks and everything else that goes part of it. So it's a pretty big process. We're meeting next week with the steering committee to review the applicants, and then we'll be scheduling the interview dates in-house in January. And it is our hope that by the end of January, going into February, we'll have a candidate. So Townsend's search we're doing similarly, but on a smaller scale, because it's a smaller school. Bill has tasked me with being superintendent designee to run that as well. We are staggering them a little bit because there's a lot obviously to do with this process, and we want to do a good job of it. And so we have pushed the Townsend one. We'll post that after the winter holiday, and then stagger that into the process for applying will be in January, and then interviews in February, and so on and so forth. So it'll be like a month behind the Leland and Gray one. So yeah, but involving the stakeholders and getting groups together and so on and so forth. So that's the basic premise of the update and the timeline and where we're at for those 2. Happy to entertain any questions about that.
Good, Lindsay.
I'm just curious if there should be board representation on the steering committee.
That's, I guess, up to you guys. I have parent representatives already from the PAC, which is sort of the local advisory group for the school. So I guess the superintendent will make their recommendation to the board. Boards can do lots of different things. Boards can meet with finalists. They can accept a superintendent's recommendation. If you want to have board representation in one of those on that steering committee, there wouldn't be a full board interview on that day, though. So that would be the only difference, that the steering committee maybe wouldn't be part of a larger group, but having representation on that group, could be fine. I would defer to Bill to see how he feels about that. He's the current superintendent, so he's just designated me to run this, so I would defer to him, really.
So the law is that the superintendent brings a recommendation to the board. So I get the beauty of working with 5 different boards, and all different boards like to run it in all different ways. I asked Bob to develop a system that would reflect the Leland and Gray process. And so that's what he's presenting to you tonight. But if the board wishes us to augment that, then I will take that direction.
I would say that this would probably be the easiest process for us if the superintendent brings the recommendation to us. Because obviously at the end of the day, we can say, yeah, no, we don't like this candidate, try again. So that's just my thought on it. But go ahead, Lindsay.
I don't know that I feel strongly one way or the other about it. I just know that it's a really super important decision that's going to affect everything that we do from this moment forward. And if we are the ones who are the stewards of this, for us to say, well, we're not really going to be involved in it though, feels off to me. So I don't know the best way to be involved. I just know that we, as a board, should not delegate our responsibility away. And I also know that we are not all educators, and we are not the ones who need to be spearheading all of this. But I do think that we, when it all comes down to it, are the ones that are responsible for how things go here. And I just want to make sure that we're very active in that whole process. That's all.
That's reasonable.
We could add a board interview to the process. I mean, is there anything that says when Bill brings us the candidate, we can't interview the candidate before we decide?
So Bob, describe the process again in terms of, so steering committee does the screening, you get an applicant pool, you come up with a candidate or candidates, or, well, obviously you would come up with a final candidate. So let me just think about this. So Drew, are we thinking that in that last section where we have 3 candidates, and we're trying to narrow it down to 1, is that kind of where we would feel like we'd want the board to have some input?
I would say even if we get down to 1 before, as opposed to be given a name, voted up or voted down, I agree with Lindsay, it'd be nice to at least have the opportunity to find out who the candidate is, learn what we learned in the process, ask some questions, and at least feel comfortable with voting yes or no on a candidate versus just, you know, we all love Bob and Bill, but I agree with Lindsay, it'd be nice to know versus, hey, here's a name, vote in favor of this.
And I feel like a little comparison is helpful there. To, you know, it's one thing to say like, yeah, okay, I talked to that person and they seem like they really got their stuff together. Like, that's nice. But to talk to 2 people and feel like, wow, they both have their stuff together, but this one had more to say, then I think whether that, I don't know, at least some sort of comparison would be nice. I feel like, so
let me just jump in. The steering committee wouldn't have a direct Q&A with the candidate. It would be the panels that would have the direct Q&A with the candidate. So, but there will be the opportunity for a parents panel, obviously, and the parent representative from that will liaise with the steering committee. So anybody who's a parent could sort of participate in that process too. But if you're looking for a role in the screening process or the question writing process or the decision process, then having a member on the steering committee makes sense. If you're looking to have a role where you're like looking them in the eye, asking direct questions, the steering committee isn't necessarily the place for that per se. So, I mean, if you joined if there are parents on the board who wanted to join the parent group, for example, the PAC liaison would run that material back to the steering committee, or you could do both and be on the steering committee. So I think there's lots of different ways to kind of think about it. But yeah, so to clarify, the steering committee isn't going to be sitting and doing a direct interview session with each candidate.
So at the end of the steering committee's work, a pool of applicants or candidates we would have at that point, right? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, so I think, so the initial pool that applies, the steering committee would narrow that, depending on how many there are in that pool, to how many we think are worth having and spend a day with us. And let's just to pick a number, let's say that's 3, right?
Yeah.
So if 3 people come and spend a day, we go through the mechanizations of each of these Q&A groups 3 times. And then at the end, the steering committee members will report back together and talk about what their individual group. So Trevor is a member of this, he's the high school member, he's the high school steering committee rep. He would sit with the student panel, and then he would come and talk about what the high school kids said to the steering committee, and that would be that's how it would be filtered back to the steering committee for making a recommendation to Bill. Does that clarify?
I think so. So that's the point where we'd want to jump in, is right, the Q&A.
After that, yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Q&A?
I think that seems reasonable.
The hypothetical 3 people, Q&A, were part of that. And you said there'd be a number of panels that would do the Q&A?
Yeah, so each of the 3 people that come to interview, they would all 3 of those people would go through the panels, the individual student panel, the parent panel, the staff panel, so on and so forth. At the end of that, then each panel's representative would come back to the steering committee and discuss it. So the steering committee at that point is still not meeting with each candidate. They're just bringing, because they've all served on individual panels. You see what I'm saying? They're just collecting all the data together. And so, because that'll be the first time in the first place where each of the groups that have met individually will be able to report out on what they saw. So you meet with the staff group and they're like, yeah, we love candidate number 1. And the support staff goes, yeah, we like candidate number 2 better. You know, and the parents are like, well, we like candidate number 3. I mean, that's where we put it all together, trying to figure out how to weigh through that.
Okay.
So,
good.
I mean,
But they won't meet, that group will not meet with the candidate at that time.
So at the end of the day, all of the panels happen, all of the deliberations happen, and the superintendent's office comes forward and says, I have this recommendation. Maybe it makes sense for them to come forward and say, I have these 2 top candidates that can talk to the board and have for any other, like, just because we don't necessarily need to talk to like a whole bunch of candidates, right? Like and then we can then, okay, we've talked to them, have another conversation to give our spiel to Bill or Bob or whoever to say.
Lindsay, to clarify, are you suggesting that the whole board meets with finalists, or are you suggesting that there's a board representative in the process somewhere, or are you not sure where you're?
I'm not. I don't know that I am super invested in either one of those, but it seems like the whole board should probably at least know who they're agreeing to hire.
How about this? What I'm hearing is that there's some interest from members of the board that the board has a opportunity to be more part of the process than rather just saying we accept or not accept the recommendation of the superintendent or the superintendent designee. Does that sound reasonable?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you let the superintendent and the superintendent designee take that feedback and Bob, could we report back on January 11th and it wouldn't mess up your time planning?
That is going to be about the time candidates are coming into the building. So if we're talking, if I heard Lindsay say is sort of like after things have been narrowed down, then no, that timeline would not mess up the process as it is set up so far.
So if a solution was another layer or an insertion into the existing process, you're saying it could be possible to communicate back to the board on January 11th that possibility based on their request.
Yep, that makes sense.
How does that sound to the board?
Awesome.
Okay.
Question.
Good, Mike.
Bob, is there anything in the process, I just want to make sure, like in the past, there's been very specific process, and some of it had me scratching my head. So I just want to make sure, like, if we get to a point, let me see how am I going to phrase this. I want to make sure there's nothing in the process where we can't fairly evaluate each candidate that we see in front of us, and the committees as well. Because like sometimes I've seen in the past where it's like, we're only going to consider this resume without a person's name, and no other details except for what's on this one form. And the way it was explained to me was if we deviated from that, we could be in a putting the board in a disadvantageous process. So I want to like avoid that.
This sounds like a Bill question.
So,
You can only do that for a little bit longer.
scrubbing resumes?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to walk a line here without divulging too much, but.
So we do need to ask the same questions of the candidates. We do need to have a process that is without discrimination.
Mhm.
We do need to have a process that is defensible if somebody complains about the process. We do keep all the documents that go into the process for 7 years. We collect confidentiality agreements, and we collect all the stuff that we get out to you during the interviews for those reasons.
Well, what was said to me privately was like, if we consider anything other than this very specific thing that we laid out as a process, then we're putting ourselves in a bad position. So I would want to avoid that.
If I was on one of these committees and I said, I will only hire somebody that is a Boston Celtics fan.
Right.
And I say that publicly, and I berate Drew who doesn't agree with me. And if everybody, I convince enough people, and that's the deciding factor, that they were a Boston Celtics fan. And we have gone through the process and we have done that. Yeah, it's gonna be a problem, man.
Right, so my point is, let's not put a thing into our process that says we're only gonna hire Boston Celtics fans, right? You know, like, I'm trying to get to the,
Sure.
yeah.
I am confident that our superintendent designee is designing a process that will be legal, transparent, and informative, as he is in a unique position to understand the necessary qualities for the running of the operation. If during the process you have particular questions about that, because I can't anticipate how it's all going to play out. And I know you're trying not to ask a specific question,
Right.
so I'm trying not to answer a specific question. I feel very confident in the process that will be developed, that will bring forth a candidate that will serve appropriately and will not limit the opportunity.
And the process itself isn't gonna have any crazy stipulations in it.
To my knowledge, as 9:02 p.m. Today, no.
How about you, Bob?
Yeah, I feel like there's something I'm missing on this whole thing. There's definitely it's posted openly nationally through School Spring. This is an open search to bring out the best candidate. I mean, I think the thing you have to remember, two things you have to remember about this process for me, it's you know, I've worked at Leland and Gray non-consecutively for 17 years. And my kids went through here, and I have a lot of passion about the place. And the person is going to be reporting to me. So, like, I have a vested interest in not only making sure the school is being run effectively because I care about the school, but also because it'll make my job way harder if it's not. So, like, I feel like that should help, you know, that should make you feel a little bit more at ease. But Mike, call me if you have questions.
I will.
Great, all right.
There's nothing wrong with hiring a Celtics fan.
No?
Yeah, that's right. Just
Especially this year.
Not contingent.
Yes.
All right, I apologize to our other principals, but given the time, unless anybody has any questions on the other principal reports, I think we'll move on to superintendent report. Anybody have any questions?
No, they were good reports.
And Al, sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
I just wanted, we talked about with the Leland and Gray one, and we didn't really dig into the Townsend one as thoroughly. I assume whatever process we follow for Leland and Gray, you guys want to use a very similar, perhaps scaled down version, but very similar process for Townsend. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fair. Yep.
Okay. All right,
Thanks,
thank
Bob.
you.
Thank you.
I'll be brief. You guys have the superintendent report, but really my big one is the WCSU Executive Committee. We try to meet monthly. Asked at their November meeting, they did not have a quorum, so they couldn't ask. It's not an official ask of the board. It's not an official recommendation from the WCSU Executive Committee. It is an ask. If the West River Board would be willing to empower their principals on December 23rd to allow their colleagues and staff to leave at noon rather than stay to the end of the school day. It's a professional development day. It is scheduled as a full day. River Valley's voted on their meeting in December to follow the ask of the WCSU Executive Committee. And I am doing my tour around to the other boards to ask if the West River Board would allow the principals to allow their colleagues to leave at noon on Friday the 23rd.
What professional development was scheduled?
So it's a building-based professional development, so it's particular to the building. Usually on days that fall right before a holiday, there is some sort of potluck or celebration that allows for a celebration for the year and wellness and community, along with particular things that are happening in the building. So I know some principals are planning on looking at the data that they got back from their parent surveys. Some are looking at getting prepared for their benchmark assessments that will be coming up in January. It's really particular to the building and what they're working on. But the principals are finalizing those plans, and so it would be, do they plan for a noon or do they plan for a 3 is the question before the board.
I'll make the motion to follow the ask.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Seeing none?
Aye.
Thank you, Ken. Crystal.
Aye.
Joe.
Aye.
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 And aye. Passes unanimously. Great. Anything else from the, was that it, Bill?
That is all.
That was it? Okay. All right. And again, I'll open it up to public comment. No, still none? All right, on to the policy committee.
All right, so policy met last week. We have some policies. The state has a new policy F2 that's a required policy on non-discriminatory mascots and school branding. So our suggestion is that we warn that policy and task the administration with review of our mascot and branding. Policy B6, we want to warn to rescind it. It's a HIPAA policy. I've talked to the VSBA. They don't recommend it anymore because it's covered by a FERPA policy. And then the other policies, B4, B2, C2, C11, C13, C14, and D22, we want to warn those as reviewed by the committee. So they'll be good for another 3 years. Those are all required policies.
Great.
D22 is not on the agenda.
Say again?
D22 is not
Right
on
here.
the agenda, right?
Is D22, oh, no, you're right.
D22.
D22.
January 11th, so my bad.
Yep, D22 didn't make the agenda, so we'll bump that one.
Sorry.
D7, I talked with Bill about, and we said we weren't putting it on.
Okay.
It only had to be done, yes, you know.
Right,
Okay. So
All right.
D22 on January 11th.
yep.
All right. Anything else
And we're still working with the administration to have the web page redesigned for policy, so you can actually go, like, model it after the VSBA one, where you can see what's required, what's passed, what's here, and find stuff.
Love it. Great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. And executive session, I believe.
We need a motion on that one?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, do we need- yes, let's do that.
Two motions?
Motion to rescind, or?
Oh, no, I thought you were gonna say
Okay,
this.
all right.
No.
For the
The motion's for the policy.
Do we want to make a
You
motion?
could do-
Motion to accept the recommendations?
You should probably lump the 2 reviews and the warrants.
Okay.
You can do 2.
All right. I'll entertain the review motion.
It's more than 2 reviews, but the review motion for B4, B2, C2, C11, C13, and C14 as reviewed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I see 2 that are review and the rest are warrant. Is that wrong? Right?
Is that another bill typo? You want to just review them, not warn them?
We're warned, this is what we went through last time, and so we're trying to be consistent. It's been done both ways, so what we're doing is we're warning them, and then,
Just warn them all.
yeah, warn them all, and then in 30 days, we
Warn
have
'em all.
another meeting and.
Warn 'em
All right.
One
Okay.
motion, warn them all.
All right.
Got it. I'll entertain the motion.
All right, I'll make the motion that we warn policy F2, B4, B2, C2, C11, C13, and C14.
B6 as well.
B6?
You have to warn that to
B6,
rescind it?
no,
Oh, we're
no,
rescinding
that's
that
the,
one.
yeah, we're rescinding
Got it.
B6.
Got it.
Okay.
Do I have a second?
Sure.
Any discussion?
Vote quick.
All right, seeing none. All in favor? Go ahead, Ken.
So moved, aye.
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 And aye. Motion carries unanimously. All right, so we
So now a
do,
motion to rescind policy B6?
yeah, do we need that? Yeah, okay.
I made
All
that
right.
motion just now to rescind policy B6.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Dana. Any discussion?
None.
Seeing none. All those in favor? Ken?
Aye.
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 Oh.
Aye.
Aye.
Drew?
Aye.
Aye.
And aye. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, and we do need the executive session, correct? Did you have something before that, Drew?
No, you're right on schedule.
All right, we caught it back up there, yeah.
Ahead, actually.
Ahead of schedule.
Not bad, not bad. Okay, so I need to read both of these, correct?
Yes.
It's 2 motions, right? First
Yeah,
one, then
first
the second.
All right, first motion, I move to find that premature general public knowledge regarding academic records or suspension or discipline of students would put the board at substantial disadvantage because the school board risks disclosing private student information if discussed in public.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, go ahead, Ken.
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. All right. Second motion. I make a motion for the board to enter executive session under Title I, Section 313 of the Vermont Statutes for academic records or suspension or discipline of students, 313A1.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All the ayes.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
All right, motion carries unanimously. And shortly, we will be in executive session.